So much to do today. So glad to have you with us. It's DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, brought to you by my good friends at Merriweather and Tharp today. It's Terence Edwards. Later on, we'll talk to Terence about, what draft night is like for these prospective players about to move on to that next level. And obviously, a whole lot today on the playoff expansion topic. It's one of those things where, you could do draft all day long, but frankly, the playoff stuff that's been out there the last few days is too juicy not to get into. Yesterday on SEC Country Live, it was really amazing how that kind of drove debate in those comment sections really all day long. So that was incredible to be able to see. We'll do some of that with you today. There is news around the SEC that we'll kind of touch on of interest to UGA fans there as well. So what do you say we get it started? DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
In a normal day, normal year, you would say the day the NFL draft begins. Obviously, you should start the show with that and probably speak about it for the entirety of the show. Certainly, there was an argument being made for that. We'll obviously get into the draft before we're done today, but we have a topic that we have to get into off the top because I think it's just too juicy not to get into. A little bit of a I want to kind of craft a debate here. I'm kind of see if I can string this together. A debate with Georgia coach Kirby Smart on one side, Alabama coach Nick Saban on the other. These two have obviously squared off before. It's almost like mega powers explode from WrestleMania 5. Friends turned enemies. They used to work with each other. Now they work against each other. And so we're going to kind of pit them against each other in a debate here coming up in just a moment. Of course, the big news around college football the last couple of days, and it's really amazing how much people have been talking about this. We did a lot of our R.S. Andrews cool down on this yesterday on both podcast and video. People reacting to the changes that could be coming to the college football playoff. Let me kind of give you the facts and the news on this, then we'll kind of get into some of the opinion stuff. Stuart Mandel, Andy Staples writing for The Athletic, but the possibility of more than just playoff expansion, which the selection committee hinted at last Friday, but possibly massive playoff expansion coming there as well. Can I show you the tweet here from Stuart Mandel, who talked about this, who said, "Where do things stand on CFP expansion?" he asks. "There's surprising momentum for something bigger than 8 teams, and there's concern about boredom from the same teams each and every year making that college football playoff and the kind of lost interest that comes from the bowl games because of that." And Mandel and Andy Staples went on to write that story there for The Athletic about not just playoff expansion, which we've talked about before, which could possibly be 6 teams or maybe 8 teams. What Stuart Mandel says, and Bill Hancock's in the story, the executive director of the college football playoff and everything else, is that we're actually looking at massive, double-digit teams in the playoff, maybe as many as 10, 12, 16, somewhere along those lines, that we're kind of looking at massive playoff expansion. And it's really interesting to hear two of the most high-profile coaches in all of college football talk about this right now, because they are talking about it on very different sides of all of this. And as you might imagine, there's a little bit of self-preservation, self-interest when it comes to which side each guy is kind of on in relationship to this. Let me start with Kirby Smart, who was on the Paul Feinbaum show yesterday, and in talking about, being asked about, hey, have you heard about this idea of playoff expansion, adding more teams to the college football playoff, given the fact that Kirby has seen his team be number 5 in the country a couple times, on the outside looking in of a chance to be in a college football playoff. You are probably not surprised to hear that Smart is pushing for playoff expansion, thinking that is a good idea. This is Kirby from Feinbaum.
I think if you polled any coach, it'd be foolish to say that you didn't want expansion. The current system's certainly working. It's been successful. But to give more teams an opportunity, I think is a good thing. And I think you look at years past, how many times 4 beats 1 or 3 beats 2, you could say the same thing could happen all the way to 6, 8, or 10 teams.
So you hear Kirby Smart right there say, I don't know of any coach that would be against the idea of playoff expansion. You're giving more teams a chance to compete for a title. You're giving more chance to see surprising outcomes take place. We've seen them before, he says, when it comes to a college football playoff, and you're offering that opportunity to happen. He says, who in the world could possibly be against an expansion of the college football playoff. Well, maybe he knew this, maybe he didn't, but at least one coach seemingly is not in favor of playoff expansion. As I said before, it is Smart's old boss, Alabama coach Nick Saban. Now, once again, it's easy to understand why Alabama has had a stranglehold on the current format. They have been in the playoff more times than not. They have won national championships in multiple instances during the playoff era. They even figured out a way, because of their big brand and benefit of the doubt or whatever else you want to say, to make the playoff in 2017, even when they weren't SEC champions. So if anybody would be in favor of the current format because of how much it's working for him already, then obviously Alabama coach Nick Saban would be that guy. In fact, he argued for this playoff expansion. I don't quite think this is such a good idea. This is Nick Saban.
The more playoffs we have, the less significant bowl games are going to be. So it's really not for me, and I don't think I'm even capable of judging how significant the positive self-gratification so many players get, so many programs get, so many coaches get for being able to go to a bowl game. And now everything has shifted to the 4 teams in the playoffs, and the bowls seem to be pretty insignificant. So I think if we expand the playoffs, you're going to see a continuation of that trend where the bowl games become less and less significant. And maybe these two things can't coexist. But if they're going to coexist, maybe we should try to, leave them pretty much the same.
So listen, Nick Saban wants to leave it all the same, leave it all the way that it is, because as he just told you right there, Saban is for positive self-gratification. He likes people to feel good about themselves. He wants the players that go to the Bluebonnet Bowl or whatever other kind of lower tier bowl that's been devalued because of the college football playoff. He doesn't want those players to feel devalued. And making the playoff bigger, in his mind, only increases the likelihood that somebody somewhere might not quite feel so good about themselves there at some point in time. Because when you think of Nick Saban, the rants during press conferences, the berating of players, and the just sort of general disregard he at times has for decorum, the one thing that comes to mind is, this is a guy who puts self-gratification and feeling good about yourself, self-esteem. This is a guy who puts that at the very top of the list there. I mean, I obviously say that sarcastically, but it is interesting to hear Saban, as a way of arguing for what benefits his program, keeping the playoff at 4, as a way of arguing for that, he kind of goes to listen, let's let people feel good about themselves with an expanded bowl system and a playoff that's not encroaching upon that. And then he even went so far as to say that, listen, there's potentially a player safety issue here if you make these playoffs any bigger than they are. This, once again, Saban from the Feinbaum Show.
I know there's a lot of interest in the playoff, but the other thing that I would be concerned about is, how many games should we really play? I mean, the SEC championship game, to me, if you look at all the years we played in, most of those games were playoff games. We were playing somebody in the top 5 and had an impact on who got into playoffs, who got the championship game. So you're going to eliminate that so you can have more playoff games, or we're going to play less games in the regular season so we can have more playoff games. I think there's only so many games in these guys. They're student athletes. They're not just football players. So I think some of those things have to be taken into consideration as well.
So Nick Saban, with a straight face on the Paul Feinbaum Show, says, listen, these guys can't play in the college football playoff any more than they already do because they got to go to class. I mean, how in the world does he do that with a straight face? Listen, these guys got an exam. They got study hall. They can't be playing a national quarterfinal game. 4 is all we need in the playoff. These guys got independent study courses and whatever else they got to do. They're student athletes. These aren't just football players. He says there, and for Nick Saban to even, the audacity, the absolute gall of Nick Saban to say, listen, we're in the SEC championship game, and that's kind of like a playoff game as it is, except for the year you made the playoff when you weren't in the SEC championship game. This is kind of the funny part about this is that, when it comes to a coach arguing what is in his own best interest, there is really no there's really no end to the ways in which coaches will try to spin this in their direction, arguing about the SEC championship game when, as I said before, that has not always been Alabama's path to the title game. And by the way, that was also true back in the BCS era, if you want to go back to 2011 there as well. But when it comes to the idea that it's just too many games for the college football playoff if you expand it out into a quarterfinal or even expand it out beyond all of that. Kirby Smart, when he made his own appearance on the Paul Feinbaum show yesterday, not specifically retorting to Saban, but a response nonetheless. We told you we're going to kind of construct a debate here between these two. This is Kirby's response to the idea of, well, it's just too many games if you make the playoff bigger. Here's Kirby.
Well, I would liken it to, if they want to take something away from that, then, maybe we don't play as many games in the regular season. Maybe it gets shrunk down there, or, we all have scrimmages in fall camp. I certainly think that the possibility is there for that expansion. I think the players would enjoy that. There would be more positive experiences coming out because more people feel like they had the opportunity to capitalize on a big season.
So Smart's argument is obviously just as self-serving as Saban's is. We kind of like Smart's argument better on all of this. So, we'll give him a little bit of a free pass there. But clearly, he's arguing in his own best interest there as well. But kind of the final point on those is this, is that, listen, people have a tendency to say whatever they want about Kirby Smart. Bama fans do, non-Georgia fans do all across the board. In some cases, even media does. But the one thing you can't say about Smart is, looking at the scenario in which that has existed, his team kept out of the playoff in 2018 when certainly in an expanded playoff they probably clearly would have been in there. Maybe you could say the same thing about 2019, maybe there as well. Instead of just kind of whining about that, instead of just kind of saying, the system is out to get us, and we're kind of held back by the system, or all the things that Smart could have said, the honest truth is that's not what Kirby did. And this is the thing that even a non-Georgia fan ought to give him a little bit of credit for. That when he looked at this system that was kind of broken and kind of wasn't really giving him what he needed, he said, how can we manipulate this system to our advantage? In other words, if the committee thinks that we're not one of the four best teams based on what we've done in a 10-2 season when we lost the SEC championship game close and lost the game at LSU, if we're not proving enough to show that we're one of the best teams on the field in the country, then what's the kind of schedule we can play in the future that gives us a chance to prove that? And so he goes out and says, all right, we'll add the Oklahomas, we'll add the Texases, we'll add the Clemson's, we'll add the Florida States, we'll add the very best programs in the country. We'll play multiple Power 5 non-conference opponents each and every year. And in future years, that's essentially what Georgia's doing. Kind of starting this year with Clemson and then really going on deeply into the distant future when you're playing multiples of these games in each and every year. Kirby essentially saying, hey, we're going to play such a tough schedule that we're going to dare the committee to keep us out if we have a pretty record when that's all said and done. And to Smart's credit, he also talked about that more on the Feinbaum show yesterday. Kirby again.
For us, as a university, we've had, 4 consecutive years. You finish in the top 10, maybe the top 7 or 8 teams in the country. I mean, you're on the outside looking in a couple times because of maybe one game. You certainly would like to see that opportunity to grow, get more teams involved in that. It's certainly a very tough competition to get in those 4 right now, and so much of it becomes who you played, and that's one of the really aggressive things we've done at Georgia is scheduling out. It's been my thought all along that if the CFP expands, the strength of schedule is going to play a major factor in that. So we want to go out and get a lot of big games outside our natural SEC conference schedule.
And as I said before, even if you're not a Georgia fan, you ought to be able to acknowledge that Smart pushing the sport in that direction with tougher non-conference schedules. He is the guy that just objectively is the one that started this. Then I think it makes the sport better overall. And by the way, as a way of kind of wrapping up this entire discussion, let me just say that, I have two minds here. Obviously, I'm a Georgia fan, and it's self-serving for me to want a bigger playoff because Georgia would have been included in a bigger playoff in the past, almost certainly, and maybe in the future has a better chance of making because of that too. But simultaneous to that, I also think it's better for the sport to have a slightly bigger playoff. Now, I'm not in favor of anything double digits necessarily, 10, 12, 16, nor do I think that's actually the direction the sport's eventually going to go. A lot of times in sports, you see a negotiating tactic of, in the NFL, we want 18 regular season games. Well, what they really want is 17. In the NBA, we want players to have to sit out 2 years out of high school before they come to the league. Well, what they really want is just the one. Sometimes you kind of start a negotiating position somewhere in the hopes of land kind of somewhere in a slightly more sensible space. And I believe this is probably true there as well. Expansion is probably coming, but it's not double-digit teams, I believe. It's more likely to be something around the 6 or 8 mark. 8, I happen to think, is the perfect number. And once again, not just because that benefits Georgia, although as a fan I'd be happy to see it do so, but also because I think it benefits the sport. There are more than 4 teams deserving of a shot at the national championship in most years. And frankly, I don't trust the committee to pick the 4 best right now, given the way they've operated in the past. By making it 8, by possibly having more opportunities for teams to automatically qualify in there, you're taking power out of the committee's hands. And frankly, the committee hasn't proven they deserve the power they have, so anything that moves in that direction, I think is for the better. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us, no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just really happy to have you with us as we roll on here today, getting ready for the NFL Draft tonight. Playoff expansion talk kind of at the forefront here. All kinds of fun stuff going on. And, of course, don't forget my good friends at Meriwether and Tharp. Make it all possible. You know, Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. You can reach out to them at theatlantadivorceteam.com. And what they're going to do for you is so important because, let's face it, the divorce process, even the word divorce, is the kind of thing that can sometimes stop you in your tracks, and you either have unpleasant memories of your own divorce or fear and concern that might be on the horizon for you. And if I could wave a magic wand and say all those feelings go away, obviously I would, but clearly I can't. What I can do, though, is for those of you who find yourselves about to go through this and you're kind of deciding, yeah, you know what, that is the next step for me. I can build a better life in a new relationship or just exiting this relationship, then my friends at Meriwether and Tharp are going to walk with you step by step. They're going to educate you about the process. They're going to advise you about, important steps. They're going to help you be made to feel whole again. They've got free resources like blog posts and podcasts and everything else. And once you make the decision to put them to work for you, they're going to be a tireless advocate on your side there as well. So please find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, it's Terence Edwards coming up here in just a moment. One more thing, though. Let's go around the doghouse before we get to Terence. And I do want to spend some time, once again, on the Feinbaum interview with Kirby Smart as of yesterday, because the other thing that kind of comes up in this discussion is the upcoming season opener against Clemson. Now, it's obviously a big game in terms of what's going to happen for these two teams on the field and the positioning for the national championship race in the 2021 season. But as Kirby, and this is one of the things that you get when you have an alumnus of your university as the coach of your team, you get someone who has a great appreciation for the history of Georgia versus Clemson as well, and the knowledge that so many Georgia fans also view this as like a massive, massive rivalry game going back to my childhood in the decade of the 1980s. And to me, it's just really refreshing to hear Smart talking about that when he speaks on the Feinbaum show yesterday. Another brief clip of Kirby.
It's a rivalry game, and you go poll your fan base, which is really the most important thing, and you look at your alumni base and you look at your financial supporters, you're saying, what do you guys want? And to a T, they want to see these kind of games. The one benefit we found last year was playing the conference games only. That was so important to the fans. They love those games. And to go out and get a Clemson, which, most of our financial supporters and our alumni base, that's a game they grew up watching. They want that game. They want that game year in and year out. And that's probably the same way for Clemson. I think Dabo would tell you the same thing. It's a great opportunity to go out and play a really good program and open your season that way.
In this particular case, it's clear that Kirby just sort of gets it, right? He knows the history of Georgia. He knows why it matters now. And, there was another point in that same interview where, he kind of made the comparison of, hey, you got a regional rivalry like Clemson, but you've also got a chance to travel nationally and go play Notre Dame, which Georgia did in 2017, and all the other big games that are coming up. And I've always said there's kind of a best of both worlds component of that. There's something really cool about playing a team you've never played before. In future years, that's what Georgia's going to do. But there's also something really cool about playing a team that you do have some history with, like Clemson, or a team like Florida State, which Georgia's going to play in upcoming seasons, which you may not have a ton of history with. Those two teams haven't played a lot over the years, but they do share a lot of geographic territory. I mean, go down to like Moultrie, Albany, or Albany, as they say down there, Thomasville. There's a lot of battleground territory for fans of, Florida State fans just north of Tallahassee, Georgia fans in that kind of southwest corner of the state. And that really matters down there, and it will matter down there. So I love the fact that as Georgia is kind of moving forward with its non-conference scheduling model, as aggressive as it is, it's making room for the big, high-profile, out-of-region games where Georgia fans get a chance to travel and you get all the prestige that comes from that. But also those short drives, Tallahassee, Clemson, and areas around there, which also kind of give you a little bit different feel of maybe potential regional rivalries just outside of your conference. I think it's all really well done by Georgia, and I'm excited about seeing all this play out in future seasons. Before I bring on Terence Edwards, let me also remind you of something else that I'm very excited about right now. It is ongoing at DawgNation.com. We're getting ready. I guess next week we're going to be announcing the winners here, so a little bit more time for you to get involved. In our Kroger 5-Star Moms promotion, we are honoring a lot of the mothers who check in on us here on DawgNation Daily, or for the listeners, viewers of our program who have a mom in their life they want to support, whether it be their own mother, their wife, or just a mother that they know that's really knocking it out of the park. This is a great chance to do that. Your nominations, they've been so much fun to read. I've had a few of these shared with me, and they're just, it's so great to see the role that family plays in just strengthening the lives of so many of the people in our listening and viewing community. I just love to see that. So, DawgNation.com. Still, you got time to find out details about getting in and getting involved on that. You can also go to info@DawgNation.com. That's an email address if you're ready to make your submission there. Big time prize pack here. It includes a $50 Kroger gift card, $50 Bath & Body Works gift card, and a $50 Home Chef gift card. So it's a great giveaway here. We want to honor some 5-star moms courtesy of Kroger. We'll do that starting next week, so take some time to get involved if you have not already. All right, very good stuff. Good to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp here today. There is a lot more around the SEC I want to get to before we're done here, including a big sign that things are heading back to normal as we head through 2021. I'll share that with you coming up. But for now, on everything going on around UGA, let's talk to the great former Georgia wide receiver, Terence Edwards.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Terence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Always a great pleasure to get a chance to talk some Georgia football with him. And, you know, Terence, one of the hot topics around college football the last couple of days has been, and it starts on Friday with the College Football Playoff Selection Committee kind of suggesting they were considering more than just 4 teams in the playoff. It's been mentioned like 6, 8, 10, 12, maybe as many as 16, and now there's reporting out there that suggests that this is, really pretty serious. And, Kirby Smart has weighed in to say that he'd like to see an expanded playoff. Alabama coach Nick Saban has said something close to the opposite. What do you think about the playoff the way that it is as 4 teams, and how big do you think a perfect college football playoff would be?
Well, I don't think it's ever be big enough to please everyone. I think at some point someone will have a gripe about them not getting in, but I would love to see more than 4 teams get an opportunity to participate in the college playoff. I don't know if, I don't know if every conference get an automatic bid if you win the conference and +1 at large, but I just think, 6 or 8 probably should be the number.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, because I think, listen, people can tune in and watch the show and, see me as a Georgia fan, you as a former Georgia player, and maybe it comes across as self-serving. In a year like 2018, Georgia could have been in a playoff like that, and it would have had the potential to make some noise had they got in there. Certainly the possibility they could have played better than Oklahoma and Notre Dame did that year. You could have maybe said the same thing about Texas A&M a year ago, though. It's not just a Georgia argument here that there are, in many years, deserving SEC teams that don't quite get that consideration as a second SEC team in the playoff. And in some years, you may say the same thing about the Big Ten, where you've seen in Big Ten East, for instance, multiple teams possibly deserving. That when you exclude those at-large teams, in some cases, you really are maybe excluding some of the best teams in the country.
Oh, I think so. I think there's a lot of teams. I just could think of back in the day when I can't remember what year it was, but when we played the Sugar Bowl against Hawaii, you can't tell me that wasn't one of the best and hottest teams around. Yes, we lost some games early on, but at the point that we was playing when we played the Sugar Bowl, we was hot and we clicked on all signals. I think my 2003 team was the same way. So I think expanding the tournament and giving some at-large bids for the teams who playing the best football and deserve to be in the tournament, even if they didn't win the conference, because that 2018 team was definitely a team that could have made some noise in the playoffs.
So obviously we're heading towards the NFL draft here tonight. First round begins. It's great television. It's incredible to watch, and obviously a lot of UGA fans really hoping to see good news for some of the Georgia players who are expected to have their name called. I want to run through a few of these names with you here for a moment, if you don't mind. The debate about Azeez Ojulari from people outside of DawgNation seems to be kind of interesting here. No one denies what he did in his season last year. Georgia, big stats when it comes to sacking quarterbacks, tackles for loss, everything like that. He's clearly emerged as a top flight player. But I guess, Terrence, you do get some questions related to, is this only a 3-4 outside linebacker? That means that those kind of 4-3 teams who want those hand-on-the-ground defensive ends might be looking somewhere different here, and just the overall size quotient that Ojulari brings to the table. What do you think of Azeez at that next level and how the stats that he put up at Georgia in 2020 kind of translates to the Sunday League?
You just think about the Sunday League is a passing league. It is all about scoring points, and the position that they put the most emphasis on is, especially defensively, is cornerback and pass rushes, and he definitely can pass rush. I mean, if people really break down his game, you watch the Alabama game. He did a great job of stuffing the run. At 240 pounds, Alabama had 3 of the top 4 or 5 offensive linemen. He did a great job holding up against the run. If you could hold up against the run against Alabama for a whole game, you could do that in the NFL. But it's a passing game in the NFL right now. And I think that's the way the game is trending. That's the way the game is going. And pass rushes are premium, and he definitely can pass rush the football. I think he's going to have a great career because he can pass rush.
So you mentioned cornerbacks. That's the other thing that you're seeing a little bit of buzz around right now. It certainly seems like Tyson Campbell, Eric Stokes, both had really good pro days and really made names for themselves in terms of their NFL future because of that. The mock drafts are kind of all over the place with these guys. In some cases, you see them as second-round picks, but there is a scenario, Tom Pelissero, NFL.com, has talked about this. Others have talked about this there as well, where maybe one or both of Campbell and Stokes could make their way into the first round here tonight if the chips fall kind of in the right way. If there's a run on cornerbacks, I think it's been said, and that run may eventually kind of, catch Stokes and Campbell into that mix there too. How big would it be for Georgia if one of these cornerbacks could have their name called on a Thursday night?
I think it'd be huge. I think both of them, best football is ahead. I'm very happy for Eric Stokes because he was a definite guy that didn't get him a lot of love coming out of high school. I think a lot of fans who put a lot of stock into recruiting services and stars just thought he was a throw-in, and why we wasting a scholarship on this guy. So he's worked his tail off to become the player that he is, and I'm just going to be extremely happy for a underdog to continue to make a dream come true. And Tyson Campbell, I always suspected this from the guy coming out of high school. It's hard to find guys of his attribute with being 6'1", 6'2", long arms, and legit track guy that played football. And I always thought he had an opportunity because of his measurables. So him being in the first round, if he gets in the first round, it wouldn't be a shock to me.
So let me ask you this question for a moment. You're going to make the comparison, some people do, I certainly have, between a program like Georgia and Alabama. Alabama is going to have, I think, at least 5 first-round picks tonight. There's a chance they could have 6. They may have 4 taken in the first 15 picks. That's obviously an amazing level of draft success. It easily explains when they won the national championship. And I guess to a certain extent, Terrence, you do see Georgia lagging behind that just a bit. There's a chance for UGA to have multiple first-round picks tonight, but there's also an unfortunate scenario where maybe, all the Georgia players fall to at least the second round on this. And I'm just a big believer that if Georgia's going to play the game at the highest level, the kind of year in, year out national championship contender, the way that a program like Alabama is, they are going to have more top-end draft success in that first round of the NFL draft. Do you agree with that, Terrence, or do you have a different opinion on that?
No, I agree. I agree because you're getting the best players. And you just think about Alabama's roster, those probably was some of the better players coming out of high school. And then you have some that pops out of nowhere that just develop. And it's all about development. I don't care where you rank that. If you're not being developed properly, you're not going to be the player that you think you are. Yes, you have some aberrations. I think Trevor Lawrence could have went to any college and been the first pick. He's been projected first pick since he was in the 6th grade. So that's like an aberration. But it's all about development once you get to these programs. Yes, we know those 5 to 6 receivers was good in high school, but they still had to be developed and nurtured to be the players that they are today.
It just seems like it's obviously going to probably happen that for some of the Georgia players, at least one of them that hopes to get drafted here this weekend, that might not occur. And yet, your own story is a reminder that doesn't have to be the end, that you, as an undrafted free agent, did make the Atlanta Falcons roster. Remind us kind of what that was like for you to kind of, and how you kind of put your hard work and helmet on, and on the heels of the draft to get out there, impress during mini camps and training camp, and eventually make that team as, something that some of these other Georgia players may have to do here this spring and heading to the summer there as well. What was that like for you back in 2003?
Yes, I think for me, just a guy that was did what I did in the SEC. There's no way I thought that I would go undrafted. Unfortunately, I went undrafted. But now your mindset changes. Your mindset, especially for an undrafted free agent, I equate it to being a walk-on at a university. Like, you get the last scraps at the table. You don't get as many opportunities as a first round, second round, third round. So every opportunity that you get, you got to take advantage of it. And I think one of the things that helped me, I popped early in camp. I showed that the coaches, especially the BB coaches, that those guys couldn't cover me. And a lot of and I still say to this day, a lot of people that I still talk to, just like, I don't understand why you didn't stick longer. And but that's, wasn't in my plans. I'm happy that way my career went in the CFL. But still to this day, man, I popped early, BA, and I got a name from the DB coach because I was so long, looked like Devontae Smith. And they called me String Bean. And still to this day, all the teammates that I had that I talk to right now, like Ray Buchanan and all those guys, they still call me String Bean. My receiver coach, George Stewart, who's, I think, the receiver coach, one of the California teams right now, when I talk to him, he still called me String Bean because I popped early on. You got to do something to get noticed. And I just think I got noticed early, and that's why I beat some of the guys out who they actually drafted that year.
Well, it's a great story, and obviously it's a huge – I would imagine, proud line on your resume to say that, yeah, you played in the NFL, make catches in that league, and that's a really cool thing to be able to say that you did. And I love the backstory there of the way in which, even to this day, guys like Ray Buchanan still have those memories. That's a really cool thing. Terence, you're obviously doing great stuff out there in the community, working with that next generation of guys who also one day hope to get their name called on an NFL Draft Thursday or an NFL Draft weekend. For folks who want to get involved in some of that personal coaching that you're doing, how can they get in touch?
You can find me at all social medias. That's Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Terence, thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate you being here today. I appreciate your stories and your evaluations, your analysis. I'll look forward to getting a chance to talk to you soon.
Thank you, B.A.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, listen, I don't care if you played 1,000 years or just a little while. I mean, you grow up, everybody has that old, that plastic NFL helmet you put on when you're a kid, that look Halloween costume style uniform. Pretty much everybody's kind of got something like that at some point in time. And to think that one day you might actually put that thing on for real, it's just amazing. You go from being a good high school player to obviously even getting a chance to play in the SEC kind of whittles down the competition so much. And then to go from that to the NFL, you're taking that elite SEC level talent and you're whittling it down even more. So as Terence talked about there, and for the guys who get a chance to kind of do that themselves, it's a really impressive accomplishment. And just, it's a human achievement, more just as much as anything else. So it's great to be able to see, and great to have Terence Edwards talking about that with us here today. And, of course, the draft success and the players that you bring to your program who are draft worthy, really the foundation for your program. By the way, speaking of foundation and waterproofing issues, let's think about our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia here for a moment. They're proud partners of UGA. It makes them fun to do business with. They've been good friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily for a long time, and they're a solutions-based company. So when it comes to your own foundation, waterproofing issues, they are going to step up and they're going to help you. If it's a simple fix, they'll tell you that. When it's a more substantial fix, you want smart people helping you get that done. They've got 2 full-time engineers on staff. They're very easy to get in touch with. Simply give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. So as we begin our SEC through here, I have some really good news. So yesterday, it was announced that SEC Media Days is slated to return starting, I think it's July 19th, the date, in Winfrey Hotel, Birmingham, Alabama, or actually Hoover, Alabama, just outside of Birmingham. Now, for the most part, I always kind of say this, that SEC Media Days is who it says it's for. It's for the media. The average fan, unless you're actually going to the lobby to see one of the coaches show up, the average fan is not hugely invested in SEC Media Days. But this year might be just a little bit different in that this is a sign that things are coming back normal. We didn't have an SEC Media Days last year because in the summertime, we couldn't be completely sure that we were actually going to have a season. But now things are obviously heading that direction. You've got SEC schools saying for outdoor sporting events, they're getting back to full capacity. Mercedes-Benz Stadium is doing that now. Braves, Atlanta United kind of joining the fold on a lot of that too. We're just heading to a direction where sports starts to feel a little bit more normal again. As more and more people get vaccinated, and as the overall health outcomes seem to be improving, we are just kind of heading in that direction, and that is a great thing to see. Now, it is not confirmed, I guess. This is going to be back to full-fledged media days with 1,000 reporters there and radio rows stretching all the way through the mall and everything else going on. But certainly you would at least think that's kind of the direction we're kind of heading right now. So let me run through the schedule of what SEC Media Days is going to be. And for a lot of these coaches, they'll be meeting the media at Media Days for the very first time here. So let's start with that first day. We'll kind of look through all of this. So beginning on Monday, July 19th, that's when Dan Mullen, Ed Orgeron, and Shane Beamer will be making his SEC Media Days debut. Interesting to have Mullen and Orgeron there on the same day. I'm sure they can kind of get together and do a little bit of an oral history of the Marco Wilson thrown shoe. First of all, Florida and LSU are just kind of pretty good rivals as it is right now. So you'll have some interesting stuff back and forth there. It is the next day when Georgia's Kirby Smart is slated to appear on Tuesday, July 20th, along with Kentucky's Mark Stoops, Ole Miss's Lane Kiffin, and once again, a debut for Josh Heupel. It's actually also, given the fact there was no Media Days a year ago, this will be Kiffin's first Media Days as Ole Miss coach. Interesting that Kiffin at Media Days the same day as his old job, his old stomping grounds there at Tennessee. Big names showing up on Wednesday, July 21st, with Nick Saban, Mississippi State coach Mike Leach for the first time at Media Days, Texas A&M coach Jimbo Fisher, and if you care, Clark Lee, the coach at Vanderbilt. Then you get to Thursday, the final day, Sam Pittman, Brian Harsin, the Auburn coach, Eli Drinkwitz there from Missouri. Drinkwitz is one of those guys that, he doesn't come across like he doesn't look like he'd have the world's greatest personality. He almost seems like a CPA as an SEC coach. But actually, Drinkwitz is actually pretty funny, so I'm sure Eli will actually be dropping some lines there on his first trip to SEC Media Days. At the risk of mockery, I'm going to now move to a little bit of a Texas A&M portion of our SEC through for a moment. I get grief all the time. People say I talk too much about A&M because I believe that A&M has a chance to be a surprise team in the SEC here this upcoming season. I talked about this yesterday on SEC Media Days. So at the risk of mockery for my own audience, I want to mention a possible reason. I think this is a really good article, and you should read the column for yourself. Brandon Marcello, 247sports.com, pointing out on the heels of A&M spring game on Saturday, for those of you who think that A&M is going to be a real threat to Alabama in the SEC West, something to consider as a reason why this might not happen. Can we show the Marcello tweet here? So Brandon had talked about 9 drop passes for the Aggies in their spring game, and Damon Demas, the former big-time wide receiver signee who's been kind of suspended, he's still not seemingly around right now and contributing. There was just a high-profile 4-star wide receiver signee who entered the transfer portal after spring practice. We talked about that on the show the other day. That just generally speaking, there's a little bit of a question of, well, if it's Hayes King that emerges as the starting quarterback, right now it seemed like he may have a slight lead over Zach Calzada. Who are those receiving targets going to be? And I do think this matters because, you obviously want the SEC to be as interesting as it can be, and the depth of the league is what makes it interesting. And the need for Jimbo Fisher, who's figured out a lot of things with his running game, who's figured out a lot of things with his defense, the need to kind of find out, do you have that dynamic playmaker? That's something that needs to be figured out because let's face it, last year, A&M didn't get any real strong playoff consideration, even being a one-loss team. And in some respects, you kind of wonder if some of this was based on the fact that people just didn't really necessarily like watching them play because they weren't all that exciting. They didn't have that big, explosive threat outside in the receiver game. And maybe that made them a little bit easy to disregard for humans in the playoff selection committee who are obviously influenced by what they're seeing with their own eyes. One more story, at least tangentially related to Texas A&M, actually tangentially related to Georgia, related to Texas A&M. Mike Elko, according to Matt Zenitz from AL.com, has removed his name for the Kansas head coaching search. This is one of those things, I believe, I don't know this to be sure, I'm just giving my opinion. It's one of those things that kind of happens sometimes when a guy knows he's not getting a job, he therefore removes himself from consideration. as a way of kind of, in some cases, saving face on this. As we've said before, it certainly seems like that the prime targets for the Kansas coaching job are sitting head coaches. In fact, at any point in time now, you could hear about a Jeff Monken from Army, maybe the lead candidate, Lance Leipold from Buffalo, Skip Holtz maybe in the mix on this, the guy from Eastern Michigan kind of in the mix on this there as well. It certainly seems like Kansas is fixated on sitting head coaches at the moment. The one thing you just don't really hear much about at all, and at this point in time I think you can assume this is just over, is that Dan Lanning is not in that kind of final group for this Kansas job, either because they never could really make contact with him, he didn't want the job, or because they just valued the experience over the up-and-coming coaching name. One way or another, this would seem to be another example of Lanning going to be back at Georgia. It does not seem like he is still that deep in the mix for the Kansas coaching job right now, as the Jayhawks, at least from several hundred miles away here, appear to be mostly fixated on current sitting head coaches for that job. A couple other things here real quick. Tennessee, after not getting very many commits for a long time, has now got a quarterback committed for the class of 2022. Tavid Jackson, a 4-star name there. Someone for Josh Heupel to build around for that class. This is a guy who's like top 20, like number 18 quarterback in the country, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. So this is not like what it would have been to have gotten a Sam Horn or one of those type names, but the kind of guy that Heupel can build around a little bit and hopefully start to establish some momentum there with that 2022 class. And then finally there's this, and I won't do a ton on this because I don't really even know a ton of what to say about it. But there has been a lot of talk around college sports about the opening up of some name, image, likeness laws that will give student athletes a chance to benefit and make money off their own endorsement potential. And, there was California that kind of got this started, and then shortly on the heels of that, you had Florida kind of show up, and Florida was very aggressive and kind of trying to get some name, image, likeness laws in the books. In fact, what was happening in Florida was pushing other states and maybe eventually even the federal government to act, because Florida's trying to get out in front of this. Obviously, the state schools there in Florida, like UF and Florida State, were trying to use this as a recruiting advantage. But there's been some action by the Florida legislature as of late that makes it seem like they want to punt on this for an additional year and not implement those laws as quickly as they could. There's been some criticism in state on this. Mackenzie Milton, who recently transferred quarterback to Florida State, has been very active on social media saying that he doesn't think this is a good thing. So still details to be sifted through on this, but an example of a state that at one point in time led the way on trying to push for name, image, likeness laws now seems to want to slow down on that. And so we'll obviously continue to follow that story and see where it goes. As we get ready to wrap up today, of course, we'll do our Gator hater roll call. And, one of the things that I love to do is find out all the ways in which many of you enjoy the show. And look, the greatest privilege in the world for me is getting the chance to keep you company, whether you're driving to work or working out or whatever you're doing. The fact that you would take me along with you, so to speak, has always just made me incredibly proud. So with that in mind, our buddy Sugar Ray here sent a great video in of him having his breakfast. He's eating some pancakes on he says an air fryer, got some sausage going there. Looks like he got some blueberries, some syrup, all kinds of stuff. And right there on his phone, he's got DawgNation Daily playing there as well. So Sugar Ray, I got to tell you, this is a video that really made me feel certainly very proud. So in honor of that, you are our golden shoe winner here today. Hope the breakfast was good and hope DawgNation Daily treated you right as well. How about Gator Hater Countdown to say goodbye to you today? 184 days. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Of course, you can find R.S. Andrews online. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. So good to have them with us and you with us there as well. Check them out online, rsandrews.com. It's hot. It's 70-something degrees when I was coming to work this morning. So we're like really in that springtime world right now. So please make sure you check that out and just make sure you get ready to enjoy all of that. As we head towards the spring and summer with a nice, cool house. That's what they will do for you. All right, so let's do this. Let's go to YouTube first today. I did Facebook first yesterday. Let's go YouTube first. We'll take a few comments. We'll find out what you're thinking. Draft-wise, playoff expansion-wise, everything else. We'll kind of do all that here for a couple minutes. All right, let's see what's going on. DMart42 says, Sugar Ray had a way better breakfast than I did. Yeah, I know what you mean on that, DMart. Know what you mean on that. Blake Robinson checking in on the show. He says, I just wanted to check in to say hello since I don't get to watch you live or on SEC Country Live often due to my work schedule, but I still enjoy the replays. Thanks for it all. Blake, that's awesome to hear. I really appreciate you watching. Thanks for coming in here to say hello. It means a ton to me. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'm glad to have you here today, Blake, by the way. Jim McLaughlin says, I'm not buying a used car from Jimbo Fisher. One thing a lot of y'all have made very clear, I do think this is funny. This is actually predating, this is like a couple of years worth of debate on this show. Some of y'all just don't like Jimbo at all. And in all seriousness, I do think some of y'all give him a little bit of an unfair rap. Let's see what else. Mark Abe says he thinks that Najee Harris sneaks into the late 20s. Could very well do it. Yeah, I mean, Alabama is about, listen, I don't take any great pleasure in saying this because I'd prefer it not to be true. But they're about to clean up tonight on draft night. They're about to clean up. Lee Godown says, I'm a secret A&M fan because I want them to beat Alabama. Listen, I don't make any secret about that. I definitely want to see them beat Alabama. I'd love nothing more. John Adams says, when will we know the SEC transfer rules? So the one-time transfer is kind of, NCAA has passed that, but the SEC rule would currently supersede that. And so I think the question comes down to, does the SEC have any leg to stand on from kind of a, I guess, political sense, that could they have a rule that was so different than the rest of college football? And frankly, I just don't know that they could. Jay Shipe says 2 Aggies just entered the portal. Yeah, I did see. We probably should have mentioned that in the regular show as well. I still haven't mentioned some of these days. I just don't get it all in the way I want to get it in. But I did see that former 4-star signee, I think a defensive back from the class of 2017. Am I right about that? That entered the transfer portal there. I knew I'd get some A&M grief in here, and I am. G. Gray Spam Boy steps in to support Zamir White. He says, I troll him, but I like that dude. He would have been great if not for the 2 injuries. Yeah, and so, obviously the injuries were a setback for him, and I guess the hope is that, however you define great, maybe just certainly very, very good. I think the hope is that Zamir could still be in line for something like that. At least that's what the hope is. Grundy, who's always happy to troll, says, I don't think any UGA players are going to get the call tonight. And, obviously there are some swing players here. It is more likely than not that Azeez Ojulari lands in the first round, but it is possible, when you're projected in a lot of these mock drafts, seem to have him projected somewhere in that kind of mid-20s back. When you're projected there's a possibility that when they think you could go 27th, if you go 33rd, you kind of fall to the second round, man. It's certainly a possibility. And while Stokes and Campbell both have a chance to be first-rounders, there's also a really good chance, maybe a majority chance, that they don't get drafted in the first round. That's all, quite possible when it comes to this. And listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. And, look, there's thousands and thousands of things to praise Georgia for. We could do nothing but shows where we did only that. But I also want to try to be as honest and candid as I can. And there is some candor required that if you want to be as good as Alabama, if you want to be viewed as good as Alabama, or programs like that, you better be producing those draft picks the same way they are. That's how that's how you get there. There's a huge correlation between how much NFL draft success you're having and how much on-field success that you're having. You don't want great recruits to come into your program and leave as good players. You want more than that. You should aspire to more than that. And Georgia's still got a little bit of a frontier to cross when it comes to really dominating drafts like the very best programs are doing. Now, it may happen next year. Certainly it looks like it has a great chance of occurring, but it needs to. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Philip Jordan Wells giving you a little Ray J there. So Tanil Calvino, so are you at the Georgia Tech Hotel right now? And she's also not too happy about Mac Jones coming to her San Francisco 49ers. Yeah, if that goes down, I just don't know. Look, Tanil, here's what I'll say, and not to get too NFL in the comment section here, but I believe that Kyle Shanahan is a smart enough coach that he could almost succeed with just about anybody. I really do. He could literally take – it's almost like like I have my opinion about the quarterbacks, but if you started saying, okay, any quarterback working with Kyle Shanahan, I like that situation almost than anything else. I mean, for instance, like Trevor Lawrence going to Jacksonville, I like Lawrence as a player, but how much do you really like the situation that he's arriving in Jacksonville? I mean, a lot of unproven NFL coaches working around there. Brian Schottenheimer in the mix. It's a strange situation down there in Jacksonville. You're kind of left to wonder, what kind of situation is Lawrence arriving into? Whereas, I mean, if you were lucky enough to get Kyle Shanahan as your coach, I mean, just look at Matt Ryan's numbers in that second year in Shanahan, and you just see the threshold of possibility there. So I don't love Jones as a prospect in comparison to some of the other guys who are out there, but when it comes to working with Kyle Shanahan, I'll certainly give him a strong chance of succeeding. For sure. Let's see what else. Jamie Scott says, can the one-time transfer be used at any point, or does it have to be after a freshman year? And also, how is Blaylock's rehab going? So I think that both Dominic and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint have gotten pretty favorable descriptions by Kirby Smart as of late, that they are certainly in the case of Rosemy-Jacksaint. He called him close the other day. I don't think he quite used the same language for Blaylock, but once again, I think there's reason to believe that Blaylock is on track here. And as far as when it can be used, I'm not an expert on this, but I don't think there's any kind of I don't think there's any kind of restriction on how soon you do it. Now, some people have argued that maybe you should have it occur after 2 years or something like that, but I think it's just kind of free to use whenever. Hugh Nash says, I was shocked to not see Aziz in the first round of DJ's final mock draft. Hard to believe that he'd fall below what I think are lesser edge rushers. Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple of these as of late where you've kind of seen that happen, where he does kind of slip to that second round. And, I just don't quite know what to make of that. I mean, I've told y'all before, I like the idea of what you do in college mattering, and I thought Ojulari, had as good a season as one could have a year ago. I do think some of this kind of comes down to, hey, you're only a fit for about half the teams in the league. Most draft prospects kind of are, and in the case of Ojulari, he's a fit more so for those kind of 3-4 type teams. And so, now you're reduced to, okay, the number of teams who are kind of looking for a player of your specs, and in that group, the number of teams who actually need, an edge rusher there at that spot. Now, I'm not a huge fan of drafting for need. Some teams still do. And so I think that's kind of the numbers game that a guy like Aziz gets kind of caught up in. Kent Caldwell makes an interesting one. And I think I actually have heard this, that the Bucs could take Ojulari at the end of the first round, a replacement for Jason Pierre-Paul. That's pretty interesting. Santiago Diarn going back to the idea of tampering when it comes to this recruiting stuff. And I don't mind telling you, the timeline of the way the Tyreek Stevenson thing worked out, the way that he ended up in Miami, it's just hard not to assume there was contact made with Stevenson before Stevenson officially entered the transfer portal. And it's one of those things where, nobody seems to care about that. And I know this comes across as self-serving as kind of a Georgia guy here, but I'm really arguing about this more from the standpoint of college football, that I think that you want to have some kind of respect for rules, some sort of sanctity for the system that kind of holds the sport in place. You can't have a sport if you don't have rules. And if all of a sudden we don't care about, school X reaching out to player Y while he's in the before he's entered the transfer portal, while he's still on somebody else's roster, then before long it's going to be the Alabamas, Georgias, Ohio States, Clemsons, LSUs of the world who are doing that. And you better believe that people are going to have a very different feeling about that once it's, big teams poaching guys off somebody else's team. Like the story my dad used to always tell me, and I'm always very, very lucky to have these sports stories that my dad told me from times before I was born. And he used to always tell about, as a kid, growing up in the 1950s as a kid, that back then the Athletics were in Kansas City, and the thought was that every time the Kansas City A's got a good player, that player was eventually just going to be in the New York Yankees. That's just kind of the way that kids in the 50s sort of grew up. Well, if the A's have a good player, then eventually the Yankees are going to get him from the Kansas City A's. And you don't want college football to be the same kind of thing where, the transfer portal rules haven't really been enforced. Therefore, there's poaching off somebody else's roster. Before you know it, it's not just kid leaving one school to go back home, which is somehow kind of a feel-good story for some people. It's going to end up being, hey, Georgia needs a cornerback, so they start, calling cornerbacks on somebody else's roster. That's not quite as much of a feel-good story, but if you don't enforce the one rule, you have a harder time enforcing the other. Chad Buchanan says championship hopes for this season rest upon our offensive line play, and that's certainly been a hot topic around here. A lot of folks kind of believe that, and I understand where you're coming from. Jamie Kennedy says, how many first-rounders flop in the NFL? There are some, for sure. I mean, what's the batting average? Probably about 50% that, if you're taking in that kind of first, 32 picks, you probably have an overall about a 50%. It's also kind of interesting that, like, picks 1 through 17, I've seen some numbers on this before. Like, the first half of the first-round guys kind of succeed at the same level. So you think, well, if you're drafting first overall – and I can't prove this to be true. I just read this one time. If you're drafting first overall, you're thinking you're getting a player that has a much greater chance of succeeding than someone drafted, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th. And the honest truth is the actual hit rate is a little closer to the same for guys drafted first, guys drafted in the teens. And then as you go later in the first round, it kind of drops down a little bit. So, but yeah, I mean, the batting average is not perfect for anybody. It's one of the reasons, Jamie, why I just don't really care that much about individual player evaluations. Like, every now and then I'll obviously spout off and say, I think this guy's going to be good. I don't think that guy's going to be good. But that's just an opinion. Even for, like, experts, NFL GMs themselves, when it comes to picking one guy for one spot, their batting average on getting that done is not always great. Kevin Cook says, who do you want the Falcons to pick? And I love for all other, Falcons fans in our comment section to weigh in. For me, it's still Fields. If I got that number 4 pick, I'm hoping that I don't have the number 4 pick again in the future. And look, here's the thing about Pitts. And I know y'all think I'm just biased against Pitts, and I guess to a degree I probably am because he's a Florida guy. But here's the thing. To me, there's too much certainty amongst the draft community that Pitts is a game-changing player. You watch some people on television, and they kind of talk as if the floor for Pitts is Travis Kelce. In other words, like, at the very least, you're getting Travis Kelce, and you may get, even more than that. And, y'all, that's just not true. I mean, you can't treat a guy in a draft who's really very, truly unique for this position at that spot in the draft. The idea that teams would trade up for him is even more outlandish. You can't treat him as, well, at the very least, he's the best tight end in the NFL, and if nothing else, he may be, surefire Pro Football Hall of Famer. That's just a little too much certainty for me. Years from now, history has a way of not being too kind to you if you drafted tight end when you could have had a game-changing quarterback who is in your hometown. Remember, this is like the thing with Jordan and Sam Bowie, going back to when he was drafted, and, Portland thought they needed a center, and famous name, I forget who it was now, I said, well, draft Michael Jordan, play him at center. History does not look back on you when you pass on a real franchise-changing player and say, well, I guess you just needed this position more. And I think in the future, right now, we've all convinced ourselves that Kyle Pitts is something different than a tight end. But 10 years from now, when people look back on this draft, they're going to see that TE next to his name. And look, there's a chance he's a great player. I mean, obviously, when you see what he did at Florida, he clearly looks to be that way. But as Jamie Kennedy said, there are first-round picks that flop all the time. And if Pitts is not at least Travis Kelce, then a lot of people are going to be left to wonder, well, why did you draft a tight end so high? So conventional wisdom, I think, at a certain point in time should win out. You are very close to needing a new quarterback, even if you don't need one this year. There's already talk of, a post-June 1 trade of Julio Jones. Teams who are having a conversation about trading their best player are in rebuilding mode. Falcons are in rebuilding mode. Draft Fields. That's just what I would say. I know I've talked way too much about the NFL draft right there, and I apologize. Let me get back to your comments. Blake Robinson says, I think Pitts should be the fallback if Fields isn't there at 4. And that's kind of an interesting idea. I mean, I don't have a problem with Atlanta drafting Pitts. And if it's a comparison of Pitts or a Trey Lance or even a Mac Jones, I'd rather have Pitts than one of those guys, even though it's commonly assumed that Lance and Jones are kind of elite prospects. I just happen to like Justin Fields. This is a personal preference type thing. And I just told you a moment ago, don't necessarily take my personal preference as gospel here. I just happen to like Fields more than the other quarterback, so that's the one I'd feel the most strongly about. Davis Painter says, do you think that Darnell Washington is a 3-and-out guy? Honestly, and listen, I don't wish him out of the program, certainly. I'd love to have him for 4 years, but just given the way that I think he's growing, not physically growing, although he may be doing that as well, but just the way in which his stature as a player is evolving here, it certainly seems like a possibility. Lee Godown says Julio for Hall of Fame. Yeah, no argument for me on that. West Georgia Dog fan says, I don't think that Fields would be happy sitting behind Ryan for 2 years. Maybe not 2 years, but there's something to be said for sitting for a year. I think sometimes your transition to the league can be easier when you get to watch at least for a little while. Nature Gator wants the Falcons to select Pitts. He says he is a generational tight end and difference maker, much better for sure than Fields. I don't know. Look, Nature, most people agree with you. I certainly acknowledge that. I guess what I'm saying is that if we looked at the preponderance of evidence over the course of years, position would matter. Quarterback would be more valuable than tight end. And I don't think we should disregard that just simply because we've convinced ourselves that Pitts is a, unicorn, once-in-a-lifetime type prospect. G. Grace Bama Boy says Atlanta needs a quarterback, not Pitts. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Pitts if Atlanta doesn't take him. All of a sudden, is there trade-up talk? Because you got to think Cincinnati's going with Sewell, don't you think? Be interesting. Maybe it's just as simple as he lands at Miami. But it'd be the draft gets really interesting if Atlanta doesn't take Pitts. I would say that. I'm excited about the draft, though. It's going to be fun. Daniel Aldrich also talking about the possibility of Pitts to the Falcons. Yeah, it should be interesting. Look, you got to feel like the first 2 picks, you almost wish they could just make those now and the draft could start with San Francisco, because that's when the drama really gets going about which guy San Francisco may take, although I guess, conventional wisdom, has it being down to a couple names. But that's where it really gets interesting. It's just good TV, right? It's just a good TV show. Ace Dog, thanks for checking in. Foster Moss says, what about a 10-game regular season, conference championship game, and top 10 playoff system? Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with that. See, this is one of those things where, Foster, I think we all have to understand that we talk about college football different than most of the country does. Think about this. There are really about 3/4 of the SEC that don't have any real shot at winning a national championship, not just in any given year, but just across the board. They're just not national championship contenders. Like Auburn almost made the playoff in 2017, but think about how far removed even a program like Auburn is from being a real national championship contender. They've just, kind of fallen in kind of a 3-star recruiting territory, and they've, lost a lot of games and big stadium, a lot of fans, but it's just not quite what it once was. And I'm not picking on Auburn. I'm giving you an example of there are even some really big programs that aren't quite competing for a national championship. So when we say, well, hey, college football would be great if it had a 10-game regular season, SEC championship, then a 10-game playoff, because as Georgia fans, we sort of think we'd be watching our team playing in most of those games. If you took a regular season game away, all you're doing is adding it to what you think would be a really engaging postseason. But for most people, most programs, even big programs with a lot of fans, if you said we're going to reduce the regular season to increase the playoff, well, you're taking away games from that program they have no chance of making up because they have no chance of making the playoff. Even expanding the playoff doesn't bring all that many more teams into the discussion. It just doesn't. This is the challenge that college football has. And I don't know what you do about this, and I've said this before, that week to week during the season, sometimes I get a little bit, to say depressed is too strong of a word. Think of a word that means similar to depressed but less intense of a word. Sometimes I get a little bit depressed about the fact that the average fan just doesn't treat, like, say, Georgia-Tennessee as a big game. In the 90s, when I was growing up, that's a big game. You wanted to beat Tennessee. Of course, Georgia had a hard time doing that back then, so maybe that made the game feel bigger, but it felt like a big game. Georgia-Auburn in the 80s, when I was growing up as a kid, that felt like a really big game. No matter what the records were of the two teams, this is Georgia-Auburn. That kind of mattered. And somehow, some way, over the years, I really don't know why this is. I guess the playoff has had something to do with this. Maybe it has all to do with it. But it just doesn't seem like we treat the week-to-week games as big as we once did. It's all about like think about casual fan. Think about the fan that that is not quite as plugged in as you. Like that guy or gal is all into the Georgia-Clemson game. And they kind of dip out, it seems like, and kind of dip back in once you get to Florida or something along those lines. Like it just seems like it's gotten a little bit easier for like casual fans to kind of dip in and dip out. And you got to figure out a way not to do that. So make the playoff better and more appealing for the teams who can truly aspire to that. But you got to make some of these other games feel bigger again. For the teams that can only aspire, excuse me, for teams that can only aspire to go to bowls, you got to figure out some way to make those bowl games enjoyable, which their TV ratings are actually not so bad for bowl games, but rivalry games, things like that, the week-to-week regular season games, they just need to matter more. And I guess I kind of wish they did to the average fan in a way that sometimes right now they just kind of seems like they kind of don't. Ace Dog likes Foster's idea, by the way. All right, we got to get ready to go. John Adams on the subject of Ohio State and its history with NFL quarterbacks. I really don't hold that against Justin Fields. I mean, if you want to do the thing with Haskins because he was also in a Ryan Day offense, I guess that's fine. But even in that same scenario, I'm really not going to hold it against Fields that he's at a program that has had failure at quarterback before. So I'm certainly not going to hold a Cardale Jones or any of those guys against Fields because that was many, many years ago. That predates him. That's like those quarterbacks were all in a Kevin Wilson, Tom Herman system, weren't they? I mean, we're talking about many, many offensive coordinators ago. So I know that there's a popular narrative out there of, this is Justin Fields coming from Ohio State, a place where quarterbacks have left and not done well in the NFL. But I think the Fields situation for me personally is just completely different than all of that. And nobody's a guarantee to have a successful career, and I wouldn't guarantee Fields having a successful career either. But, I mean, I think there's a lot to like about, some of these guys in comparison. I should say a lot to like about Fields in comparison to some of those guys. I guess Mike's got a story about, would he have been better off staying in Georgia because his draft stock is dropping? I mean, let's keep this in perspective here. His draft stock may drop him to like 8th overall to Carolina or 15th overall to New England. I mean, I guess, Chris Sims had kind of a contrarian mock draft that had him dropping to the Bucs at the end of the first round. But let's keep the idea of his draft stock dropping in relative terms. He's not dropping to day 2 or anything like that. He's just simply not going 2nd overall, which is a place that some people kind of thought he was going. But there's plenty of chatter that the Panthers might want him, the Patriots might want him, Atlanta might still consider him. He's not getting out of the first round. So let's just keep the idea of Fields' draft stock supposedly dropping. Let's just make sure we keep that in context. And the only reason why I said that is because when I opened my phone back up, I saw a story. All right, we got to go. Jermaine King on the subject of dark meat chicken. So it's amazing how my taste buds have changed a lot. Like 2 things I used to love. I used to love dark meat chicken. I used to love the thigh. Like the thigh was my favorite part. And now I only eat white meat. I only eat breast. I only eat wings. That's all I do. I have just definitely gotten to be kind of a white meat guy when it comes to that. And the other thing I used to love is hot dogs. And like now, like a regular hot dog, like a bratwurst, something like that, I can still do. But a regular hot dog, I just can't do anymore. Like one day, my taste buds just changed like that on 2 things that I used to love. Philip Jordan Wells and the idea of Fields to New England, that would be certainly very interesting. All right, anything else before we go? Let's see if I can get these comments back. All right, here we go. Last thing on YouTube before we go. All right, well, we are going to get ready to go. Jay Shipe says nothing better than thighs in a smoke or tastes like white meat. I have heard that. I've heard that there's a real way to cook those up, and I used to love them. I just haven't done that in a while. John Adams says ribeye night with the draft. That sounds good. I tell you, one of the things that my wife has gotten to where she does is she cooks these steaks in like the big cast iron on the stovetop. I'm telling you right now, that tastes about as good as anything I've had coming off a grill. Just nice and simple and easy. It doesn't even have to be an expensive piece of meat. Just nice char on the outside. pretty juicy on the inside. I've gotten to where I just love that. Very simple and not too expensive, not too hard to cook. Now, it fills the house with smoke sometimes, but other than that, it's really good. Lee Godin says, go to Fat Matt's in Atlanta next time you visit. Yeah, Fat Matt's, I know all about Fat Matt's now. I've been there plenty of times, for sure. I love the music they have. A lot of times they have like a blues musician in there playing. That's a pretty good spot, and that's, I guess, as close to a free plug as I'm going to give. But yeah, I know all about that. All right, y'all have a great day. Thanks for being here. RS Andrews Cool Down. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Also, they'll get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. They'll take really good care of you. As you might imagine, with our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, there is a ton of stuff related to the upcoming NFL draft. So please make sure you take that out. This is going to be a big night for Atlanta, but also just the rest of the league there as well. It's just a great thing to be able to do. So please make sure you check that out today and just stay up to date on everything that's going on in the world here. Also, I guess the president's visiting the state here. Be careful. That means, aside from politics, but I believe he's coming to Gwinnett County. Y'all keep your head on a swivel for that. Those presidential motorcades do a absolute wreck to traffic. So y'all be careful about all of that. All kinds of stuff going on. Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com. I'll see you back here tomorrow. We'll recap the draft and do everything else that's going on. We'll talk to you then, everybody.